Hey everybody, we're wrapping up the final week of our series today called Big Questions. We spent the last few weeks talking about some big questions we ask about who we are, where we fit in, and why we're here. And we found the better answers to our biggest questions actually come from God. The big question we're asking today is this: what's the point of me? And we might not word it like that. Maybe it's more like this: why is this meme-loving, Mountain Dew drinking, basketball playing, Taki eating, funny joke telling me even here? In other words, what's the purpose of your life right now? Talk about a big question, right? Big questions about big purpose can feel like a lot right now. And when you step into the church world, the question gets even bigger. You might hear people at church say things like, God has a plan for your life. And that feels like a lot of pressure. It sounds like it means you have to be a pastor or a youth leader or move to another country to tell people about God. And what about if you weren't sure what you think about this whole God thing? Where do you fit into that big plan and purpose then? All these questions about purpose feel big. And maybe they even feel like questions you don't worry about right now. But today I want you to consider that whether you realize it or not, God does have a plan and a purpose for you right now as a middle schooler. And it might be different than what you think. Today, we're gonna read a little bit of a letter written by a guy named Paul. Paul was a leader in the early church who often wrote letters to believers in other parts of the world. This letter was written to people in a place called Corinth. In this letter, we learn a little more about Paul and another guy named Apollos. These two were basically what we would call influencers. That's because people followed them. Paul and Apollos were leaders that followed God and made a big difference in leading other people to do the same. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I hear things like this and immediately count myself out. I could never be like Paul and Apollos. I don't know enough about God. I don't know enough about his followers. I don't know how I'd tell anybody anything about what I believe. God's purpose for them couldn't possibly be the same as God's purpose for me. Well, let's take a look at the letter that mentions both of these guys. So who were these two? They were only God's servants? Was that all they had to do for God to use them? They weren't any better or any less than anyone else. They just believed and followed God. What did they do after that? Well, they did just what this verse tells us. The work the Lord gave them. They didn't try to find a plan or a purpose in anything other than what God called them to do. They just did the work that was theirs. What does this mean exactly? Well, let's keep reading to find out. Check it out. So we have to keep in mind here that during this time this letter was written, farming and agriculture were a big part of the culture. These examples of planting and watering would have made a ton of sense to the people reading it back then. They would have understood that when it comes to farming, you need people who plant and you need people who water. It takes both people to do their specific jobs to successfully grow anything. If the planter doesn't put down the seeds, the water being poured out on empty soil, and that's it. If the waterer doesn't show up to water the seeds, then nothing is gonna grow out of that ground. Both jobs are equally as important. Both purposes are important to making the seeds grow. And who does that? Well, God. God has the most important part in all of this. God makes the seed grow. All we have to do is show up and be willing to serve our unique role and let God do the rest. That's your purpose. To choose every day to be a part of what God is doing in this world. See, you matter more than you think. No matter what your part is in what God's doing, you matter. Because by serving in your unique role, you can be part of what God is doing to make the world better. Right now, today, you can find purpose by participating in God's plan for the world, by being a part of making the world better, simply by being who God created you to be. Maybe it's as simple as being kind to someone today, or doing your best at practice, or helping out your parents at home. Maybe it's doing your best in science class or inviting someone here to church. What you're good at, who you live with, what you care about. All that stuff is a part of who you are and who God made you to be. And it's all the stuff that can help you participate in God's plan and purpose. You matter much more than you think. Those big questions we have about why we're here and what we're doing in the world, the answers are found in God. God is always in the business of making the world better. And we can be a part of that story every single day. You can be a part of what God is doing to make the world better, and that's how much you matter to God. Now, let me be clear about something. Sometimes we hear the word better, and we think it means that we're going to get everything we want. Like everything is going to get better for us if we're following our purpose. Unfortunately, that's not always the way it works. Following God's purpose doesn't mean better grades, more followers on TikTok, better friends, all our problems solved. We're talking about better in a bigger way. God's better means that there's good end to the story of life in the world. And we get to be a part of making that world better through our love and our actions. So where do we start with this? Well, you can't jump into practice and what God's doing if you don't see it. So start by noticing and look at your schedule just for the day. What classes do you have? What people will you see? What responsibilities are on your shoulders? And all of that, look for what God might be doing to make the world better. See how your teacher chooses not to give you lunch detention while you were talking during class. Notice the way your friends treat you or the way you treat your parents. Be grateful for practice that you have, the meal that you share with your family tonight. Just take time to see what God might be doing in your story today. Then think about how you can join in on that purpose. You matter so much that God wants you to be a part of a bigger purpose. You can live your life today as part of God's story in a million different ways. The way you talk to your siblings, the way you treat your teammates, the effort you put in at band practice, the respect you show your step-parents, the invitation you extend to a new kid to join the small group. All those things and more add up to doing your part in God's story and what God is writing for the whole story of the world. So remember, you matter more than you think. You can be a part of what God is doing to make the world better, and that can start today.